Hi everyone, I'm Shreyas Bhat, a master student at the University of Southern California. I'll be presenting our paper on DAISIM, which is a computational simulator for the MakerDAO stablecoin. A stablecoin is a new class of cryptocurrencies that attempts to offer price stability and are backed by a reserve asset. Stablecoins have gained traction as they attempt to offer the best of both worlds, the the instant processing and security or privacy of payments of cryptocurrencies, and the volatility-free stable valuations of fiat currencies. MakerDAO has a crypto collateralized stablecoin offering called DAI. The Maker protocol aims to stabilize the DAI price algorithmically using collateralized debt positions or CDPs. In our paper, we have designed a computational simulator for the single collateral die, which is psi, that can be used to understand how it behaves under different settings and different parameter values. In our paper, when we started work on this paper, like the Maker protocol only supported single collateral die. ETH was the only accepted form of collateral. Over time, the Maker protocol has allowed additional collateral types, but in this paper, we focus on the single collateral model. Now we see how does a CDP work. Say a user wants to borrow DAI. Firstly, the user needs to deposit some collateral to the CDP smart contract. Typically, a collateralization ratio of 150% is set, which means that for every $150 worth of collateral, the user can borrow $100 worth of DAI. In this case, if the user sends $150 worth of ETH to the CDP smart contract, he or she is eligible to obtain $100 worth of DAI. Once the user is ready to pay back his debt, he or she pays $100 worth of DAI plus some stability fees to sort of close the CDP contract. Once this is done, like the CDP burns the return DAI and will return the collateral to the user. This is a general overview of our computational simulator, which is DAISIM. We have the DAISIM market simulation, which serves as the core component of the simulation that includes optimizing investors, buy-sell order matching, and iterative price updates. The simulator takes in a bunch of inputs and, and outputs the DAI settling price. Each investor in the simulation is modeled as a Markowitz portfolio optimizer for holding a portfolio of 4 assets, that is USD, ETH, CETH, and DAI. Each investor also has a risk tolerance parameter, which might be different for each investor. Also, we assume that the mean and covariance for the assets are known quantities and transaction fees are accounted for in the simulations. For every market, we need a system of buying and selling in place, which calls for an order matching mechanism. Since we have a closed market with no external source of DAI, the total amount of DAI in the market does not change unless someone mints more DAI by opening a like by opening a CDP. We define B as a total outstanding buy order, and we define S as a total outstanding sell orders in the market. This figure aims to make this buy-sell order matching mechanism clearer. On the left, we'll see that we have 5 investors named B1 to B5 who have outstanding buy orders. On the right, we see that we have 4 investors named S1 to S4 who have outstanding sell orders. And we can see the sell orders are something like 200, 50, 70, and 70. The buy order aggregator simply sums up all the outstanding buy orders, and similarly the sell order aggregator sums up all the outstanding sell orders. In this case, B is 460 and S is 390, and clearly B is greater than S. So therefore, we can meet all the sell orders, but the buy orders are met in proportion to their individual buy orders. So like taking for B1 as an example, who placed like a buy order of $100 is only able to purchase $84.78 worth of dye. And if S were to be greater than B, all the buy orders would have been met and all the sell orders would have been met in proportion to their individual sell orders. After the order matching mechanism matches buy and sell orders, we update the die price to reflect the supply-demand mismatch. The price update mechanism is very simple to see. If demand is greater than supply, then the die price is increased, or else it is decreased. Now we move on to the simulation results. Before we start discussing several results, we first outline some preliminaries. The return rates on the assets are as shown here. ETH has the highest return rate, whereas USD has the least. USD is assumed to be uncorrelated with the other assets. DAI has a weak correlation with ETH and CETH. Because ETH and CETH are effectively the same asset, they are very highly correlated. Now we define some terms and parameters to better understand our results. For a population of n investors, we define some aggregate metrics. Pi USD refers to the mean USD holdings of n investors. Similarly, we also define pi ETH, pi CETH, and pi DAI. We also define some system parameters such as RS, which is the CDP stability rate, beta, which is the transaction fee, lambda, which is the risk tolerance of an investor, P die, which is the die settling price determined by the price settling algorithm. To identify patterns in a population of investors, we define some population metrics as well. In a population of n investors, where each investor can have two possible risk values, we have a total of 2 power n risk profiles. These risk profiles define how the population as a whole behaves. So if we consider n equal to 10 and we fix the risk tolerance parameter, that is lambda, for a single investor, we have 2 power 9, that is 512 possible combinations of risk values for the other 9 investors. For each of these risk profiles, we know how much ETH DAI CETH the investor buys or sells. The mean of this value across 512 observations is called mean change. We also identify one more population metric called mean die price. This is the average die price across these 512 risk profiles. Now that we have defined several important metrics, we can analyze the impact of system parameters. Here in figure 1, we plot an investor's distribution of assets, and we see how does this distribution change as we increase the stability rate. We observe that as we increase the stability fee RS, CETH holdings go down and ETH holdings go up. This is because at high RS values, investors prefers to close CDPs and convert CETH to ETH. This slide gives us an overview of the impact of transaction fees and stability rate on mean asset change. In figures 2a and 2b, we see mean CETH change versus beta for both risk types. In figures 2c and 2d, we see mean ETH change versus beta for both risk types, and so on. We now discuss how does risk preference affect investor assets. In figures 2a and 2b, we see that a risk-tolerant investor CETH change is more sensitive to beta as compared to a risk-averse investor. In figures 2c and 2d, we see that a risk-tolerant investor prefers to invest in the riskiest asset, that is ETH, whereas a risk-averse investor doesn't invest in ETH at all. Also, we observe that for a risk-tolerant investor, mean ETH change goes up and then goes down. We believe that this happens because of two reasons. The increase is because of the investor selling CETH and buying ETH instead. This is evident from figures B and D. We see mean CETH goes down and mean ETH goes up. The decrease is because of high transaction fees, for forcing the investor to purchase less ETH as compared to when TX fees were lower. In figures 2E and 2F, we observe a risk-tolerant investor prefers to hold on to DAI, whereas a risk-averse investor prefers to get rid of DAI. In figures 2G and 2H, we see that mean CE change for a risk-tolerant investor is more sensitive to RS as compared to a risk-averse investor. In figures 2I and 2J, we see that the risk-tolerant investor prefers to hold more ETH as compared to a risk-averse investor. Moving on to the impact of transaction fee beta on investor assets, we see as beta goes up, the cost of making a transaction goes up. Clearly, this disincentivizes an investor from buying or selling assets. Increasing beta to decrease leads to a decrease in absolute mean CETH change, as seen in figures 2A and 2B. We also see a decrease in absolute mean DAI change, which is evident in figures 2E and 2F. Now we see the impact of stability rate RS on investor assets. In figures 2G and 2H, as RS increases, an investor's mean CETH change decreases because it becomes prohibitively expensive to open a CDP for minting DAI. In figures 2I and 2J, we see that any change in RS does not affect mean ETH change directly, but mean CETH change reduces as RS increases. This is because an investor prefers to invest in ETH instead of CETH at higher RS values. Because of this, mean ETH change increases and then flattens out. Now we look at the impact of stability rate and TX fees on DAI settling price. In figures 3A and 3B, we see mean DAI price versus stability rate RS and transaction fees beta. In figure 3A, we see that the mean DAI price increases with an increase in RS. At high RS values, investors prefer to close CDPs, which reduces DAI supply. In figure 3B, we observe that mean DAI price decreases and then increases as we increase beta. An increase in beta leads to reduction in both supply and demand. The mean DAI price in this case is directly related to the relative decrease in DAI supply and DAI demand. Moving on to the impact of mean USD, mean DAI on DAI price, we make some observations. In figures 4A and 4B, we see DAI price versus Pi DAI and Pi USD. In figure 4A, we see that when we increase Pi DAI price reduces. Increasing Pi DAI increases the total DAI supply in the market. So an increase in DAI supply with constant DAI demand reduces P DAI. In figure 4B, we observe that when we increase Pi USD, DAI price increases. Increasing Pi USD indirectly increases DAI demand in the market because it is a stable asset with a good return rate. So an increase in DAI demand with constant DAI supply increases P DAI. Here we discuss how does risk preference impact DAI price. In figure 4C, we see DAI price versus the percentage of risky investors. In this figure, we observe that as the percentage of risky investors goes up, DAI price increases. If you recall, risk-tolerant investors are more likely to buy DAI than sell. So we have increasing demand and decreasing supply of DAI, and therefore we see an increase in DAI price. Now we discuss how resistant is DAI price to changes in ETH price. In figure 5a, we see how much does DAI price change with respect to a random ETH price feed. In this figure, we see that DAI price closely mirrors the random ETH price feed, but the changes are very minimal. DAISIM is a single collateral DAI price simulator that accounts for rational and risk-tolerant investors and allows exploration of how different factors affect price stability. This simulator is available online as open source at github.com/anrgusc/DAISIM. This simulator could be extended to multi-collateral DAI, and the basic approach, in particular the modeling of portfolio optimizers and buy-sell order matching with iterative price updates, could potentially be adopted for other simulations of DeFi protocols as well. Thank you so much for your interest and attention. I'll take this time to thank my colleagues in the project, Professor Bhaskar, Krishnamachari, Ayten, Kahya, and Rohit Kumar. Thank you.